Welcome to Fondy Famous Mortgage Mondays. I'm here with Stephanie Core to talk about who's who in buying a home. There are a lot of faces that go into purchasing a home, and typically you start with who?
Well, you start with your lender or your realtor, right? When you're taking a look at buying a home, we're the two people that are typically the face, right? But there is a whole army of people behind us.
Yep.
We both have teams, and even beyond our teams, there are a lot of other third parties that can get involved. And depending on what type of home you're buying, there might even be a longer list.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you're looking into purchasing a home or a property of any sorts, typically you start with either the lender or the real estate agent. I would say you should really stick with starting with the lender, but many of you will have your agent in mind already.
Right.
And then you kind of go through the process and it leads you to a list of people.
It does. So, starting with, the lender, side of things, you're going to see me. We're going to get you pre-approved, talk about that budget and everything. And then you're going to go back to your realtor, who's actually your buyer's agent, right? And
Yep.
Kelly, can you tell us a little about between the difference of the buying and the listing or the selling agent?
Yep. So the buying agent, the buyer's agent is going to be the person who's helping you purchase the home. The listing agent or the seller's agent works for the seller. So there are two sides, and now there are ways that it could be the same person, but typically, more times than not, you're going to have two different agents just in one deal. So there's two sides of either of that. And then each of us has our own team behind us, people who check compliance on all of our documents, people that we have for admin and things like that. Most of which you don't ever meet or see, but they may ask you for documents from time to time. The list of documents.
The list of documents, yes.
What does your team look like?
So my team looks like a processor, typically. So that person is going to help me get extra documents from you. And they're going to be that go-between for the underwriter. So when the underwriter gets your file, they're the ones adding conditions and basically checking things off, putting the green check mark on all of those documents for approval. They're the ones that we need to appease for the guidelines for the loan program. And really at the end of the day, they're the ones that sign off on your loan approval.
Right.
So that processor, or sometimes known as transaction coordinator, will be that go-between for us on that side of things. There are so many people on the lending side. I can't even name all of them on the team, but processor, underwriter, and then our closer. The closer is the one that will work with the title company at the end of the transaction to balance the final numbers and get the closing documents out so you can sign on that day.
Right.
Yeah, so those are the big three on the lender side.
Okay. And then on our side of things, and it depends on how you work the transaction, because some of the buyers will choose to find their own people, but typically your agent and or your lender will have a list of people they recommend that you use based off of previous experiences, so they know that they've got that good name and are able to help you out the best way they can. But you would be looking at an insurance agent. You're going to need home insurance on your house. Typically, not all transactions will require, but you're going to want home insurance or property insurance, depending on what you're purchasing. Then you've got a home inspector,
Yes.
which is different than the appraiser.
Yes.
Different than the appraiser. A lot of people think that the appraiser goes in and inspects the home, particularly in a VA loan.
And there is some truth to that, because the appraiser does go and do an in-person inspection for the appraisal. So those terms get thrown around a little bit differently, but the biggest difference is the appraiser is going to go in there, take a look at the home, get a feel of, the condition, how well it's been maintained, take pictures of everything. They go back to the office and they take that home and put a report together with similar homes in the neighborhood. They're called comparable sales. And then they come up with that value. Whereas your home inspector is working for you. He's not really required as part of the loan transaction. We always recommend it though. Always, because we're not experts, and that appraiser is not going to call out, big, unless it's like a big, huge, major repair or, as you mentioned, VA loans or FHA, USDA, they have a little more property, condition requirements than perhaps some conventional financing or other loan types. Mostly it's all health and safety stuff, basic things like making sure there's smoke and carbon monoxide detectors in the home to, so you protect yourself in case something happens.
Caulk is always coming up on inspections.
Oh,
caulk your windows. It's
yes.
not anything that's required to close, but what they're looking for is just things that you want to know before getting into that home. There's always the risk that there's things that are underlying that you wouldn't know about, but typically they're going in, looking at the home, inspecting, taking a better look, more like a fine-tooth comb, you could say.
Exactly.
To see any issues or concerns that they have. That way you guys know and are best prepared for getting into a new home for you.
And even just for planning purposes, for maintaining
Budgets.
the home, I loved my home inspectors because they, told me how to maintain certain things or, stuff to do in the spring.
Air filters. Change your air filters, people.
Right, more than twice in a lifetime, right?
When we bought our house, we didn't know to change our air filters. Now, I have a property management background now, and I didn't know until I started property managing that you need to change your air filters. You're supposed to change them monthly, but at least every quarter, depending on, what you have in your home.
Oh, goodness. Yes.
Yeah, that was a fun surprise.
I learned now living with a well, there's a water filter, in there as well that like every couple months you want to be checking and, depending on how often you flush that system out. So having a home inspector, like Kelly said, they're not going to catch everything, but they're going to catch so many things and you're going to gain a lot of knowledge just from having them in there, which, when you compare that to the appraisal, it's great to have pictures and, confidence in the value that you're paying for the home, but it doesn't have, those details that are really going to help, put a maintenance list together or some tips and tricks.
Yep. And relating to home inspectors, you have the water testing, septic testing, foundation inspections if it's warranted. Sometimes there are cracks or things that you kind of see that you may have concerns and want to bring in an expert specific to those things.
Exactly. Cracks, like they could be nothing. It could just be, some settling and different things, but, it could be a sign of an underlying condition.
Yep.
And one of the biggest repairs that I see are septic systems. If they have any problems with that, that's something that you absolutely want to know before you purchase.
Yep. And I remember having a deal where there was a tree that was close to the house and there was the sidewalk was coming up because of the roots on the tree, and the sidewalk was close enough to the house that we were having to figure out if it was an issue that was going to affect the foundation. So just things that you may or may not realize that you can just kind of get some extra caution. You can also do those after, if it's something that's not a concern, but you just want to know what the ins and outs are.
Right.
But absolutely would recommend getting an inspection for a purchase of a home or business.
Right, absolutely. The last inspection I can think of that would be required on the loan side only for VA financing. So if you're a veteran using your VA loan program, in certain counties in Wisconsin, usually in the lower side, southern side of the state, up through, right below Fond du Lac County is kind of where that line is. Wood destroying pest inspection.
WDIR.
Yes.
Commonly referred to if you ever hear that term.
Right. They used to call it just like a termite inspection, but it really is wood destroying pests because in Wisconsin we don't typically have termites, but we have other pests that
bees, carpenter bees.
Yes, and carpenter ants. Yeah, they will get into your wood, and from the surface, those wood beams look fine, and you just like crunch them. You can crunch them and they just disintegrate.
You can picture a property we did that at.
Oh no.
We didn't purchase it. Yes.
But yeah, so very important to know just like kind of what's involved and who, and we work, both of us, have a network of great contractors and local people that are very familiar with what's needed and required that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one thing that I've learned in all of this too, as far as work goes, I know it's really easy to choose the person who costs the least amount of money. Be cautious. Get a few quotes if you're able. I know it's hard to even find people to respond to your phone calls these days, which is ridiculous, but just be cautious of what you're getting and the experience that they have. Take a look at reviews, take a look at, all sorts of things before you make the decision, especially with bigger things.
Right. It's just like any service. You could, go for the lower cost, but then are you compromising on the quality of that? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just like everything. So,
yeah.
We didn't talk about the title company.
Oh, yeah. It's because they're like the invisible people behind. They do a ton for you.
Right.
But you don't really see them necessarily.
No, it's the magic. You walk in on closing day, you sign some papers, and you walk out.
They're your favorite people. You wanna be their friend, right?
Exactly. I mean, that's where we have the celebration and closing, but they do a lot of work behind the scenes. So typically when you're doing a transaction, you want to use a title company or a licensed real estate attorney to handle the deed transfer. And the title company behind the scenes, man, they are researching all the public records, everything on that house, the seller, and you as a buyer to make sure that there aren't any liens that would attach to the property that won't get satisfied at the closing. So for instance, the title company is going to find old mortgages. Sometimes maybe they hadn't been correctly recorded as satisfied and paid off. They're going to make sure all of that gets taken care of. Another thing there is, if you do work on a property through a contractor, you don't pay them. That contractor is going to put a contractor lien on that property. So, using the title company is just an assurance to know that everything was paid off free and clear, with that sale, everything's transferring to you. You're not on the hook for, any weird things on that property that might have happened in the past.
Yep. And title insurance is something good to consider and sometimes required, but something that'll help you CYA, as we'll say, just in case anything comes up that was missed or, errors happen. So
yes.
Takes a whole crew.
It does take a whole crew. Another crew that may or may not be part of a transaction would be a survey crew.
Yep.
So surveyors are going to actually find the legal limits of your property, right? Yep. They're going to stake it out. They're going to draw a map up for you. Usually we see this if you're separating a parcel, right? Like taking 20 acres.
A large piece.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So if you're separating stuff, they have to do a whole new parcel and draw it out, get that all recorded at the county level. Some states just require surveys for any purchase.
It's Florida. Not a bad thing to have either, especially if you're a little bit concerned as to where your neighbor's stuff ends. Sometimes your neighbors have been encroaching on your property or the previous people's property. So something to consider. Definitely not a need in all cases, but many cases it is or should be.
Right. Especially if you're considering building a fence or, something like that, it's really good to know exactly where that line is. So you're not encroaching on your neighbor, but also, making sure your neighbor's not encroaching on you.
I know of someone who had to take down their fence because it was a foot or something over. And I mean, it was their mistake. However, that sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
The worst I ever saw was actually someone had built their home over the line. So originally, it was, I think it was all owned by the same person and they hadn't cared, at one point, but at some point somebody sold and whatever. And then that line was underneath the side of the house. Craziest thing I ever saw.
Wow. Wow, that is encroaching.
That was encroaching quite a bit.
Dang, that's interesting.
Yeah, so, that was fun. And I think that's pretty much everyone. That's the whole army, you guys. People will come and go and things, throughout the transaction, but I can probably say between your realtor and your lender, we're the concierge for you and the go-between and helping coordinate all of these people behind the scenes because, you're busy packing and moving and, working to make sure that, we get to closing day. But, behind the scenes, everyone here is always working to make sure that we're hitting those same goals.
Yep. It takes a whole village, as they say.
Yes.
And those are all the people in your village. So, yeah.
Yeah. Very nice. That was fun.
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
you.